Carl Jung believed loneliness is not simply being alone, it is something deeper, something more painful, something that can happen even when people are sitting right beside you. There is a line from Jung that explains this feeling better than almost anything else. He said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people about one." And what he meant was that loneliness is not always the absence of people. Sometimes loneliness is the absence of being understood. Because you can have friends, you can have family, you can be in a relationship, you can be surrounded by voices, messages, laughter, and conversation, and still feel completely alone. Not because nobody is there, but because nobody can reach the part of you that feels most real. That is the loneliness Jung was talking about. The loneliness of having thoughts you cannot explain, feelings you cannot translate, questions people do not want to hear, a private inner world that seems too strange, too heavy, or too uncomfortable for others to enter. And this kind of loneliness is different, because if you are physically alone, at least the problem seems clear. There is no one around. But when you are lonely around people, the pain becomes confusing. You start asking yourself, why do I feel alone when I am not alone? Why do I feel unseen when people are looking at me? Why do I feel unheard when people are listening? Why do I feel distant from people who say they love me? This is the loneliness of being misunderstood. And it can be one of the most painful kinds of loneliness because it makes you doubt your own inner life. You begin to wonder if you are asking for too much, if you think too deeply, if you feel too strongly, if you are too complicated, if the things that matter to you should not matter so much. And slowly you learn to hide, not because you want to be fake, but because you have learned that certain parts of you are difficult for others to receive. You mention something important once and someone laughs. You try to explain your sadness and someone tells you to stop overthinking. You talk about your fear and someone gives you quick advice. You share something that took courage to say and the other person changes the subject. After enough of that, a person begins to understand something. Not everyone deserves access to the deepest parts of you, but the tragedy is that sometimes, after being misunderstood too many times, you stop offering those parts to anyone. You become quiet. You become careful. You become skilled at being around people without being fully present. You learn how to smile without revealing, how to speak without confessing, how to be liked without being known. And from the outside, people may think you are fine. They may even think you are easy to be around. But inside, something is still waiting. Waiting for someone to ask the right question. Waiting for someone to understand the silence behind your words. Waiting for someone to notice that your loneliness is not because you hate people. It is because you have not found many people who can meet you where you actually are. Jung understood that every person has an inner world, a private world of dreams, fears, symbols, memories, desires, wounds, and questions. And for some people, that inner world is loud. It does not let them live only on the surface. They cannot simply go through life talking about weather, money, gossip, and routine. Something in them keeps asking deeper questions. Why am I here? What am I becoming? Why do I feel this emptiness? Why do I repeat the same patterns? Why do I feel different from everyone around me? What part of me am I hiding? What part of me have I never been allowed to become? And when a person carries questions like this, ordinary conversation can begin to feel painful. Not because ordinary things are bad, but because there is a part of them that is starving for depth. They do not only want company, they want recognition. They want someone to say, "I understand what you mean." Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to make the soul feel less exiled. Because sometimes all a person needs is not a solution. They need a witness, someone who can sit with what they are saying without making it smaller, someone who does not rush to fix the pain, someone who does not laugh at the question, someone who does not punish honesty with distance. This is rare, and because it is rare, many people begin to believe they are alone in what they feel. They think nobody else has these thoughts, nobody else feels this distance, nobody else looks at life and feels both fascinated and tired by it. Nobody else feels like they are performing normality while secretly living somewhere deeper, stranger, and more difficult to explain. But Jung would say this is part of the human condition. There are parts of the psyche that do not become visible in ordinary life, parts that hide beneath the personality, beneath the social mask, beneath the version of yourself you use to survive in the world. Jung called this social mask the persona. The persona is the face you show others, the role you play, the version of you that knows how to function at work, with family, with strangers, with friends. The persona is not always false. Sometimes it is necessary. You cannot show your entire soul to every person you meet. But the danger begins when the persona becomes your prison, when you become so used to performing a version of yourself that you forget what is underneath. You say what is acceptable. You laugh at what everyone laughs at. You hide what feels too strange. You pretend to be simpler than you are. And eventually, you may be surrounded by people who like your persona, but have never truly met your soul. That is a lonely life. To be liked for the mask, but unknown in the depths. To be accepted only because you have learned which parts of yourself to keep hidden. And this is why being misunderstood can feel worse than being alone, because when you are alone, you can at least be honest. But when you are around people who cannot understand you, you may feel forced to abandon yourself in order to stay connected. You make yourself smaller, clearer, lighter, less intense, less honest. You translate your inner life into words people can tolerate. And sometimes, even after translating, they still do not understand. So you stop trying. You keep your real thoughts to yourself. You become your own hiding place, and the loneliness becomes internal. This is where Jung's idea becomes so important, because loneliness is not only a social problem, it can also be a signal that something inside you is not being expressed. Something important is trapped, a truth, a wound, a desire, a question, a part of yourself that has not found language yet. Many people try to cure loneliness only by adding more people, more messages, more noise, more social events, more distractions. But if the real loneliness is the inability to communicate what matters most, then more people will not necessarily solve it. You can add more people and still feel unknown. You can be more visible and still feel unseen. You can receive attention and still feel untouched, because attention is not the same as understanding, and popularity is not the same as intimacy. This is why some people feel lonelier after being around others. They were physically present, but inwardly absent. They spoke, but not from the deepest place. They laughed, but not with their whole self. They were included, but not understood. And when they return home, the silence feels even louder, because now they know the truth. It is possible to be with people and still not be met. Jung's view of loneliness also connects to individuation. Individuation is the process of becoming whole, not perfect, not flawless, whole. It means becoming conscious of the parts of yourself you have ignored, denied, or hidden. And this process can be lonely. Because the more honest you become with yourself, the harder it may become to live only for approval. You may begin to outgrow certain conversations, certain roles, certain relationships, certain versions of yourself. You may stop pretending to enjoy what drains you. You may stop agreeing with things you do not believe. You may stop hiding the questions that make others uncomfortable, and when this happens, some people may not understand you anymore. They may say you have changed. They may call you distant, strange, too serious, too sensitive, too deep. But maybe you are not becoming strange. Maybe you are simply becoming less divided, less willing to betray your inner life for the comfort of others. And this is one of the paradoxes of becoming yourself. At first, it may make you lonelier, because you can no longer belong in the places where only your false self was accepted. But this loneliness is not always a punishment. Sometimes it is a threshold, a quiet space between who you were pretending to be and who you are becoming. Not every loneliness means something is wrong. Some loneliness comes because you are beginning to hear yourself more clearly. Some loneliness comes because the old life no longer fits. Some loneliness comes because you are finally admitting that being surrounded is not the same as being understood. But there is a danger here too, because being misunderstood can make a person proud. It can make them believe nobody will ever understand them. It can make them retreat too deeply into themselves. It can turn loneliness into identity. The person begins to say, "I am different from everyone. No one can understand me. People are shallow. I am better alone." And sometimes this is not wisdom. Sometimes it is defense. A wound trying to protect itself from being disappointed again. Jung would not want a person to worship their loneliness. He would want them to understand it. Because loneliness can reveal a truth, but it can also become a hiding place. If you are always misunderstood, the question is not only, why can no one understand me? The question is also, have I learned how to speak honestly? Have I given people a chance to meet me? Or have I hidden myself so completely that no one could find me, even if they tried? This is difficult, because being understood requires courage. It requires expression. It requires the risk of being misread. It requires saying something real before you know whether it will be received gently. And that is frightening for anyone who has been dismissed before. But without that risk, the soul remains locked inside itself. And then loneliness becomes not only something others do to you, it becomes something you help maintain. Not because you are to blame for your pain, but because the parts of us that have been hurt often learn to protect us in ways that also isolate us. This is the quiet tragedy of being misunderstood. You want to be known, but you fear what will happen if you are. You want someone to come closer, but you have built a life around keeping people at a safe distance. You want to speak, but you have learned to expect disappointment. So you wait for someone to understand without being told, and sometimes no one does. This is why the lonely person often lives with a secret resentment, not hatred, not bitterness exactly, but a tired feeling that says, "Why does no one see what is obvious to me?" But what is obvious inside you is not always visible to others. People cannot always hear the thoughts you never say. They cannot always understand the wound you only hint at. They cannot always recognize the depth you hide behind jokes, distance, silence, or politeness. And maybe this is one of the hardest lessons. To be understood, you must sometimes make yourself understandable, not by becoming fake, not by simplifying your soul until it disappears, but by finding the courage to give language to what has been silent. The right people may still not understand everything. No one can fully enter another person's inner world. There will always be a distance between souls, but sometimes even partial understanding is enough. A moment where someone listens without rushing, a conversation where you do not have to perform, a friendship where your strange thoughts are not treated as a problem, a relationship where honesty does not make you feel unsafe. These moments do not erase loneliness completely, but they remind you that you are not impossible to understand. You may simply have been offering your depth to places that could not hold it. And that realization matters, because not being understood by certain people does not mean you are unknowable. Not being valued in one environment does not mean your inner life has no value. Not being able to communicate with everyone does not mean you should stop trying to communicate with anyone. Some people will only understand your surface. Some will only understand your usefulness. Some will only understand the role you play in their life. But there may be others who can meet you more honestly. And sometimes, before you find them, you must first stop abandoning yourself. You must stop treating your depth as a defect. You must stop apologizing for caring about what others ignore. You must stop believing that being misunderstood means being wrong, because many important things are misunderstood before they are recognized. A feeling can be real before it is explainable. A thought can be valuable before it is accepted. A person can be meaningful before they are understood. And maybe this is what Jung's idea gives us, not a cure for loneliness, but a way to see it more clearly. Loneliness is not always proof that you are disconnected from people. Sometimes it is proof that you are disconnected from expression, from language, from honesty, from the courage to reveal what matters. And sometimes it is proof that you have been living too long among people who only know the version of you that learned to survive. So the question is not only, why am I lonely? The deeper question is, what part of me has never found a place to be spoken? Because that may be where the loneliness lives, not in the empty room, not in the unanswered message, not in the quiet night, but in the part of you that has been waiting for years to be understood. And maybe this is why Jung's idea stays with us, because it tells us that loneliness is not always about the number of people in our lives. It is about whether our inner life has somewhere to go, whether our thoughts can be spoken, whether our pain can be heard, whether our strange, quiet, hidden self can exist without being dismissed. So ask yourself, are you truly alone? Or have you spent too long hiding the parts of you that most need to be understood? If this reflection speaks to you, follow this channel. Here we explore philosophy, psychology, literature, and the quiet questions that live inside the human soul.